All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to Still Moon Art Society's Shedding Light talk series. Tonight we have a very special guest, Gillian from the Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice. And I'll let her speak to what she'll be talking about tonight, but just wanted to quickly, before we start, just do a land acknowledgement. So all the work that Still Moon Arts does happens on the unceded stolen territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And this talk tonight is especially important because it's affecting a lot of communities that we all know and love, and we have a lot of ties to and connection to, and all of this is tied within the greater arch of what has happened to leading up to this point. And a big part of that is, of course, settler colonialism, neoliberalism, capitalism, all the isms. And so, yeah, I just wanted to give space for that, and it's just super honored to have Gillian join us and share what they're working on. So I'll just hand it off to you, Gillian, and I'll open up the slides for you.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks so much for having me and for the introduction. I'm the Food Justice Coordinator at Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice, which is a program that runs out of Collingwood Neighborhood House. I've been in this position for just over 6 months. So it's been a really exciting time kind of getting my feet wet and building out this program a little bit more actively in terms of advocacy and justice. That's where a lot of my passions lie. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I know there are a lot of people in the audience that are really special to me and have also really shaped, my thinking on parallel food systems. And yeah, I just want to thank you all, and we'll also thank you again at the end of this. So yeah, next slide.
Yeah, I don't mind. Let me just do it. No, I'm happy to do it. I just want to be ready.
So I want to begin by acknowledging that I am coming to you from the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And for me, in this conversation about food, food is not apolitical. And food has been and continues to be used as a weapon of colonization. So from the destruction of blue camas meadows to the gross mismanagement of fisheries, including barring Indigenous peoples from accessing salmon. That case, the Sparrow case, was heard on the banks of the Fraser River here. And then in a more modern sense with what happened in Mi'kma'ki and continues to happen in Mi'kma'ki over the winter in the lobster fisheries. There's also a significant overrepresentation of low nutritious foods kind of pumped onto reserves, including in some cases pop that is cheaper than bottled water on reserves that don't have access to clean water. So in that respect, food has been taken away from Indigenous people and bad food has been forced onto Indigenous peoples. And these are genocidal actions. When you take somebody's food away, you are killing them. In addition to the physical food itself, colonization also requires land. And the way that Western farming practices use land is through intensive land use, putting the land under production and subduing it. And this is really at odds with the extensive land use needs of Indigenous peoples often need to grow their medicines and harvest and gather in the ways that they know best. So for example, current conventional agriculture practices such as using man-made fertilizers creates a lot of phosphorus runoffs that affects salmon. Fields have displaced berry patches and medicine patches. And in addition to that, colonial understandings of property also feed into this land distribution, including like the fencing off of land for fields, for livestock and food cultivation. And within that, like also the bigger the bigger picture of like the reserve system and the past system of demarcating where Indigenous peoples can be and cannot be, and where Indigenous peoples can access food and cannot access food. So with that in mind, I invite you folks to think critically about food systems. I'm going to be talking a lot about settlers of color and our food systems, which also lie on top of Indigenous food systems. So we'll touch on that a little bit moving forward, but we can go into the next slide and I'll kind of introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm a mixed race settler, and I'm a descendant from CPR builders and head taxpayers from Hoi Ping County in Guangdong. That's my father's side, and I'm also the daughter of settlers from the British Isles on my mother's. I grew up on Treaty 13 and Williams Treaties lands. These are the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and I came to Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory 6 years ago for university. I'm approaching a lot of this conversation from my personal experience and my ancestral memory, as a lot of this research is really specifically on Chinese migrant and Chinese Canadian experiences of parallel food systems. And I recognize that there are several ongoing parallel food systems in East Vancouver, and I'm just going to be talking about one as an example. So this way of looking at parallel food systems comes from my experience researching and learning about historical Chinese market gardeners. When I went back to my ancestral lands, that's a picture of me in front of my father's village where he was born. As well as when I was an intern at Burnaby Village Museum, I had a lot of time to learn about the history of market gardens there, and then also working in Vancouver's Chinatown with Hua Foundation, who put together a really beautiful report on Chinatown's food assets. And then most importantly for my yin yang, my paternal grandmother. She was an incredible farmer, and I am always learning from her. In a more traditional sense, in school I studied environmental sustainability and geographies and focused my community-based research on Vancouver's food systems from a critical race perspective. I minored in gender, race, sexuality, and social justice, which has profoundly impacted how I view sustainability and also complements my frustration and how I feel about whiteness within the environmental, food, and sustainability communities. So it's kind of from this perspective that I'm approaching this subject. It's one piece of a larger puzzle of many different parallel foodways. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk about, my people and like where I come from and my experiences of parallel food. Just before we move on, I do want to take a moment to thank you all for coming because of the events that happened last week in Atlanta and the anti-Asian racism that's just been proliferating throughout this pandemic. A lot of this conversation, as I've already mentioned, is going to be on Chinese Canadian foodways and also the structural racism that created the situations that we're in today of like these parallel food systems. So I hope that you can take the time to connect the dots between these instances of structural racism and what happened in Atlanta last week. And yeah, so we can move on. So preparing the ground, these are some non-negotiable truths that I want us to start out from, and some definitions just to get us on the same page. So foodways, I've defined as the cultural, social, and economic practices relating to the production and consumption of food. Mainstream local food movement, how I've defined it for this talk, is the food systems that are elevated by the city of Vancouver in one or more of their food policies, for example, farmers markets and community gardens. And it's important to note that these are significantly white spaces, which do not adequately provide culturally appropriate food for non-white folks. Structural and power imbalances denote the ongoing and pervasive power of concentrated within specific populations at the expense of other populations. These exist along many social axes such as race, class, gender, and ability, and intersect with one another. Marginalization is the treatment of certain groups of people and their practices as insignificant or peripheral, with significant material consequences such as lower earning potential, environmental racism, or displacement. And then finally, whiteness and white supremacy. Whiteness is a pervasive belief system, a worldview, and a cultural system that Vancouver functions under, and a lot of the rest of the world. Whiteness or white supremacy upholds this dominant belief system above all others, working together with colonization and racism to ensure the continuation of whiteness as the dominant lens through which the world is interpreted. And this is achieved by consistent violence against non-white people and their practices and worldview. So next slide. What is a parallel food system? So through this talk, I hope that folks can begin to understand a couple of things about parallel food systems and ask themselves these questions ongoing. So why do they exist? What histories have led to them? Why are they maintained? What kind of safety can parallel food systems provide? What are the consequences of them? What are the potential negatives and positives of a parallel system? And how do parallel systems demonstrate agency and resistance to systemic racism? So kind of going back to the definition regarding the mainstream local food movement, which serves the power holding populations, for example, white wealthy populations. In contrast, a parallel food system is one that operates under the noses of the mainstream food movement, and it exists kind of just below the surface and is visible almost exclusively to those who are part of the community that it serves. So parallel food systems are kind of deeply wrapped in power and visibility. And so I want you to ask which systems are considered mainstream and which are considered like the local, the default food system, and why is that? So another thing about parallel food systems is kind of what is seen to the wealthy power holding populations is that which is supported by the institutions that they have created. So we need to recognize that the City of Vancouver and all government bodies in Canada are built to serve the wealthy power holding white population and is a continuing act of settler colonization on this land. So next slide. So these are some theories that ground my work. Visibility is afforded to is widespread social acknowledgement of certain practices and existences and bodies. Critical race theory is a theoretical framework which focuses on how categorizations of race function and affect different groups of people in relation to law, power, economics, and space. As a geographer, I'm very interested in space. Logics of visualization is a theory brought that I learned about from the work of Catherine McKittrick. She's a Black scholar, really incredible, very dense work, but worth it. So it talks about how like the visualization of the marginalized subject can be used as a tool to subordinate certain bodies and senses of place as like that, which is below the white kind of masculine sense of place, and that the act of actually seeing the subordinate body informs that white sense of place and the ability to control the subordinated subject. Very jargony. So basically, I have a cup on my desk, and you didn't know that until I've told you this. And for that reason, you wouldn't have been able to like smash that cup. But now that you see this cup and I'm holding it and you know that it's here, you could take it. I mean, if we weren't on Zoom, you could take it and drop it on the ground and smash it. So kind of those same kind of logics of like, if you can't see something, you can't do damage to it, in the same way that like being able to point out difference, to point out the space that somebody different from you takes up can allow you to inflict damage on them. So then finally, processes of valuation are the ways through which the making of certain bodies or practices and space comes to be understood as inherently useful within a community. So slide 6, please. Thank you. So this is a little timeline of Chinese migration and farming in Vancouver. It is not complete, but it has some important things to pull out. The first things to note are that the first and second wave of migration, many folks ended up actually staying in Canada after the booms of the CPR and the gold rush, including my ancestors, in order to send money back home. Chinese migrants and Chinese Canadians were barred from professional employment. So many folks worked in entrepreneurial and fields often to do with domestic work, including food service and restaurants, as well as farming and peddling groceries. So this law directly led to a large population of Chinese farm labor and a vast Chinese distribution network in the Lower Mainland. Some other important points to note that we will go back to in a little bit are the 1914 Vegetable Peddlers Licensing Act in the city of Vancouver and the Vegetable Marketing Act of 1927. And then finally, in more recent history, the creation of Vancouver's food policy, the Greenest City Action Plan, and food strategy are all important policy developments that I will touch on with other policies near the end of the talk. So slide 7. So Chinese migrant farming. So little history lesson. Chinese migrants brought organic farming technologies with them from southern China, including fertilizing with pig manure and using raised beds. A lot of the Chinese farmers in the Lower Mainland were from Zhongshan County. So if you're familiar with the geography of southern China, they're like south from my county, Huiping County, and then just kind of like across the river from Macau. So again, Chinese were not allowed to own land in Vancouver, at which time there were like specific parcels of land owned by the Canadian Pacific Railway that were held as development opportunities in the process of building the new white Vancouver proper. And so Chinese communities were relegated to less desirable locations. And so some of that space was where Chinatown is now today, but also along the Fraser River. And this land was undesirable to white communities as it was historically underwater, but with the skills and technologies that Chinese farmers brought from southern China, they were actually able to dredge the banks and benefit from the nutrient-rich soil along the Fraser. Guangdong is a particularly rainy place during certain seasons, meaning that Chinese farmers were like very skilled at dredging and working in these wet field conditions. And the farms stretched along the Fraser from where Musqueam Reserve is today to modern New West. And something that's really interesting that I would encourage you folks to look into more is because of the exclusion of specific locations where Chinese folks were allowed to exist and live, it created kind of these unique opportunities where Chinese farmers actually built quite strong relationships with Musqueam, renting farming land directly from Musqueam, going beyond the Indian agent and the colonial government system to like rent from the Indigenous peoples and build those connections. If you want to learn more about that, please check out All Our Father's Relations about the Grant family for more info. It's one of my favorite films of all time and makes me cry every time. Slide 8. Okay, so more on logics of visualization. So as of 1926, Chinese farmers were producing 90% of vegetables for Vancouver. In reaction to this, I think in reaction to this, in 1927, the Vegetable Marketing Act was passed in BC that regulated the prices of all vegetables and forced all growers to sell through certain grocery businesses. And Chinese growers had long sold their produce at cheaper prices, which undercut white farmers' prices, allowing their businesses to prosper. So once the Chinese farmers were producing so much good food in Vancouver, this law was passed. So in conjunction with the 1914 Vegetable Peddlers laws, that the city of Vancouver, or licensing act that the city of Vancouver put forward, that put heavy licensing fees on peddlers, it kind of resulted in 1, Chinese Canadian produce being barred from the mainstream food system, and 2, Chinese food distribution systems which had originally been the peddlers going around to neighborhoods and selling at back doors to folks who are cooking in the kitchen, they had to change. And so these changed to systems like greengrocers, like the one seen in Chinatown, but also significantly in Joyce Collingwood. For example, Consumers Produce, which is just up on Kingsway, K Market, which I'll talk about right at the end. And then there's also a ton of these greengrocers along Victoria Drive and along East Hastings. And so this divergent path created the current Chinese-Canadian parallel food systems that we can see today. It operated slightly separately from like the Safeways and the farmers markets. So let's talk a little bit about logics of visualization within that. So as I mentioned before, I find it quite curious that the Produce Marketing Act was passed just 1 year after that record high of 90% of produce being grown and sold by Chinese Canadian networks. And for me, this kind of speaks volumes to the logics of visualization of like up until that point, Chinese Canadian farmers were not seen as like big enough or not seen at all by whiteness, and therefore didn't need to be disrupted in order for whiteness to continue to achieve its goals as being like the only way to see the world and to support white interests above all else. So when Chinese Canadian food systems departed from the mainstream after 1927, they kind of returned to this place of relative safety because they were out of view of whiteness. Relative safety. Let's switch slides. So in the case of Chinese Canadian food systems, there's kind of like a really long history of hurt and exclusion and violence against our livelihoods and the ways that we eat and grow our food. And this parallel system was forced onto our community, and our community needs to live within these boundaries in order to survive. We are understandably mistrustful of the government, and to this day and seek to remain under the nose of the system in order to have a bit more freedom. So another concept that I draw on from Catherine McKittrick is called the shape of mystery. And how I understand the shape of mystery is that it is a strategic geography through which oppressed peoples are at once confined, but also resist domination and assert their agency in forms that are not easily recognizable for the non-oppressed population. So in like easier words, what does freedom look like for people who have never been free? Although it's confining to work within the parallel system due to the lack of support from folks with power and resources to maintain our foodways, it's also a necessary means of survival and cultural continuation when the folks who have that power and resource have wielded those powers and resources specifically against your community and your ways of being. So next slide. So some relevant city policies, just to elaborate beyond the food strategy and the greenest city policy. These policies all espouse a desire for sustainable, culturally appropriate and just food systems in communities more broadly. However, the way that they're written continues to demonstrate a predilection toward white foodways. For example, they're directly naming community gardens, farmers markets, and urban farms, and they do not, however, mention like popos growing in their backyards, seeds brought over from diasporic homelands, or restaurant businesses that could keep community members who work 2 or 3 jobs fed and nourished when they don't have time to go home and make a meal. Additionally, once these strategies kind of get to the ground, I've seen them fall flat time after time, and we'll kind of touch on how they're currently falling flat in Renfrew Collingwood today at the end of this talk, and I'll leave you with some homework. So as such, I do believe that parallel food systems and the people within them are right to continue their distrust of the colonial government, because it's not set up for folks like us to thrive in and the ways that we grow and eat food. So we can switch a slide. And now I just want to show you a couple of examples of these parallel food systems and the technologies within them as they exist in East Vancouver. So next slide. So seed swapping, just last week, the photo immediately to the right, a popo who volunteers with our emergency food pantry. She gifted me these baby chayote squash with their little stems growing out. I actually have some in the office right now, but they're just waiting to go into our rooftop garden. But I've been saying that I want to grow these chayote squash, whose Chinese name I keep forgetting, but for a really long time. And I feel really blessed to have been given not only like the seeds, but also the lessons on how to grow them from this popo. Because like, if I had just been given a chayote squash, I might have pulled the seed out itself and then planted that in the ground. And apparently they won't work if you do that. Also, apparently chicken manure really helps them grow. And she was telling me about how much she got out of them last year. So I'm really excited to plant those in our gardens here and then also at home. And all this to say, this is an example of seed swapping. And seed swapping is really common amongst Chinese Canadian in the Chinese Canadian parallel food systems. And it's because it's often really quite difficult to get seeds for certain Chinese and other culturally relevant vegetables. However, backyard farmers often trade between themselves, keeping heritage stock continuing to flourish in East Vancouver. So next slide. So it was actually only a couple of years ago that I was invited to see my Ying Ying's garden in Toronto for the first time, and I was really amazed at how much she could produce on such a small area of land. I just remember how she was growing food out of the cracks in the pavement. It just blew my mind. But I think it also speaks, even though that's in Toronto, like it speaks to how these backyard growers are often under a lot of restrictions, and sometimes folks are growing in containers or on tiny areas of land, and as such they have gotten extremely adept at growing vertically, including like making these trellises that I have pictures of here, which don't look like much right now, but I'm sure you've seen them all throughout East Vancouver with like hanging melons from the trellises, while greens like gailan grow underneath that need like they can't handle as much of the sun and the heat. The winter melons get enormous. I don't know how they just stay hanging like that. Anyway, so these are just like two examples of some ways that parallel food systems continue to exist in East Vancouver. I am currently really worried about these backyard seed swapping and backyard farming traditions as climate change continues to build. While there are significant efforts going toward manufacturing hardier crops, I'm worried that the crops that are being grown in backyards for cultural continuity and to eat things that feel familiar to families like my own, the popos and gongongs, their stock is going to wither under changing environmental conditions. And because these food systems are out of view of whiteness and therefore out of view of the folks with power to support them in a situation like climate change, I'm worried that our food systems will be left to die. So next slide. So what does this mean for parallel food systems today? So it's kind of under the threat of climate change that I want us to think about kind of processes of evaluation and who is deemed more important than the other, which foods can be supported in the coming climate crisis. Given kind of how we've seen the coronavirus crisis has really shown how certain folks are made vulnerable, what does that mean for our food systems? And kind of tying together how history, ecology, and culture might shape the future of our cultural continuity through food. Yeah, so next slide. All of this to say, this is all structural racism. Overall, I think these conversations and these questions point to structural racism, both historically and how it comes to be perpetuated today. The thing that I find really interesting about parallel food systems and also really scary is that it's kind of a catch-22 because folks who work within parallel systems know how dangerous being seen can be, but also given like the current ecological collapse that we are headed toward, we need to have the power and resources on our side in order to sustain our foodways. And the continued ignorance of like the colonial systems that hold those powers and resources to, you know, I mean, even dig our way out of this ecological collapse that we're heading toward. It's going to have long-lasting consequences into the future for folks in terms of like how they nourish their bodies. So next slide. Here's my homework. So now that you know what you know, right now, there is a current example of food asset displacement happening in Renfrew Collingwood. So these restaurants that you see in this photo, there are 6 food assets, Filipino and Chinese food establishments that are all slated for rezoning and demolition by a 32-story condo that is currently in the process of like being approved by the city. And this rezoning process for me has really like once again shown how the city is absolutely culturally incompetent in their approaches to anything that is not like whiter than snow. You know, I talking to the city planner, like the idea of sending out postcards in Tagalog was an afterthought. There is a lack of engagement in the ways that make sense for our communities. They hedge their failings toward our communities, and well, you can translate the online Shape Your City site into 10 different languages, but like not everyone can go online. Not everyone feels comfortable calling a planner and speaking in English. And so it just like shows again, you know, although we have these strategies, these policies, this plan for Vancouver, they just fall flat time and time again. So next slide. I encourage you to learn a little bit more about the rezoning. This is Slice of Support. Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice has been working quite closely with Sliced Mango Collective in putting together the Slice of Support Action Toolkit. You can follow Sliced Mango on Instagram or Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice on Instagram. In both of our links in bio, we have the link to the action toolkit. So please take a read through and send a letter into the city. The city knows that this is happening. They know that we are quite upset about it, and we've had really positive feedback around it. But I don't know what the future for these food assets specifically are going to look like. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if we can keep them in the neighborhood when this kind of slow monster of gentrification keeps pushing further and further east and has the backing of like institutions like the city of Vancouver. So that's my homework for you. And that's kind of it for my talk. I just want to go to the next slide and just acknowledge some folks who really helped me kind of think through this. I've been working on these thoughts for a very, very long time. And it's just now that like I feel confident enough to share them. And there's some folks in the audience today who have also really helped me out in my learning. So I do want to take the time to thank you for coming. Yeah, and then the last slide is just my references. And that's that.
Wow, Gillian, thank you so much. That was absolutely mind-boggling. really enjoyed the way that you're able to articulate all of these complex ideas, systems of oppression, and being able to contextualize it within what is happening right now. I think it's super useful for everyone to be able to kind of see what is happening through these different lenses. And I'm just super thankful for your thorough research and your lived experience and all of the things that led up to you being able to speak to this right now. So thank you so much. This was super fruitful. So I just want to, like, now that the presentation is done, I'd just like to open up the floor for anyone who has any questions or comments about what we've just heard. So we have until 8:30. We don't have to go all the way to 8:30. Just depends on how everyone's engaged with what we want to talk about right now. But so yeah, I just want to please let anyone, you can write in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, you can turn your camera on, and we can speak about what we just witnessed right now. So please, anyone who is wanting to share your thoughts, and I'm gonna leave the screen up here just in case anyone wants to see the references, but I'll stop it in a moment so we can have a little bit more of a round table. So yeah, does anyone have any questions? I'm just gonna read some of the comments right now. So incredible, thanks Gillian. We'll take a look at Sliced Mango and the work they are doing. It's from Allison. Aleska mentions, every talk I learn about the racist history of how Vancouver was made and why it is the way it is now. And I guess, yeah, I'm not sure who from Still Moon wrote this, but they wrote a question here. Do you have suggestions for steps to make meaningful change to the current status quo? Which is, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I don't know that I have like the answers for how to make that change. One thing that I really learned about when I was doing my community-based research was that, like, these parallel food systems exist for a reason, and they exist out of safety and necessity. And the kind of melting pot model of like, just include everyone, like get like the people of color to come to the farmers market, how the farmers market is right now, like, like we don't necessarily like, and that's the answer to solving everything. Like, we don't necessarily want to be there. We don't want to, like, if the playground is built by like white people, we don't want to play on your playground. And so just recognizing that there is that, like, that really long history of hurt, and longer histories of hurt than within the Chinese Canadian community, right? On these lands as well, that there's a reason. And so how do we build those relationships of trust? How do we create, and I guess this is an answer for people in power, but not necessarily for people like on the ground. But I think, yeah, it's going to take a really long time for communities who have been consistently hurt to be able to like feel comfortable in spaces like the city of Vancouver and those policy changes. And then when people get into those places, like, apply what they're saying, like, and don't just let it be something that sits on a table, and it needs to go to the ground. Anyway, that's an answer for like the city to figure out, not necessarily for whoever it is from Still Moon Art Society to figure out. I think on the ground, it's a lot of like, there's a need to redistribute redistribute wealth and power. And so like taking note of where you stand, where your positionality is in the community. How can you use what power you are afforded to distribute that more equally amongst our community members, or equitably.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we have a comment here, I think. So Jennifer writes, from someone who used to work in local government and is still active in that world, I'm wondering if you have approached the Vancouver City Council through the appropriate channels. I find one of the most powerful ways to reach city councillors is to present as a delegate at their council meetings.
I have never presented as a delegate at one of their council meetings. That's interesting. I think that definitely we're seeing a lot of, with the campaign around the food assets across the street from me right now, we're seeing a lot of uptake from the city council because we're playing through their channels. And that's really positive. But I also want to see, how do we go beyond that? You know, like every time that a community for which the everyday colonial governance system doesn't work, like every time we play within those rules, what does that do for the colonial governance system? Like that doesn't dismantle the colonial government that, you know, it's still playing within the white playground, and the white playground doesn't have any interest in changing. It doesn't have any interest in supporting people who don't want to uphold colonialism and whiteness and white supremacy. So that's kind of, you know, like how far do we actually get if we play within those systems?
I mean, in regards to that, like speaking about what can be done outside of that, because I feel like for myself personally, I think there's merit in this idea of like diversity of tactics. You know, obviously there isn't just one way in order for things to happen. And so what do you think? I mean, obviously what you're doing right now is one of those alternatives, but what are other alternatives that potentially folks like ourselves, or people that you know, people that, you know, are in, you know, in positions of like us, working class folks, to be able to help in this sort of thing, other than what we've kind of talked about just now? Like, is there other ways to kind of bridge more gaps between folks that are actually experiencing all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I come from an organizing background, so I'm very familiar with diversity of tactics. In my position now, I can't like engage in all of those diverse tactics, but I think something that has been really interesting to see over the last couple months, year now, has been like how effective direct action has been. So I'll leave you with that. That's what I'll say. I also think that it's not necessarily the role of like folks who are multiply marginalized to be like putting themselves on the front lines like that. So I think we really do need that strong allyship. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Allison writes, what does allyship in food look like?
Allyship in food. From whose perspective, I guess I'm asking, like, where do you want me to answer this question from? Like,
Alison, do you have a response for Gillian? You can unmute yourself too, or if you would like.
White people. What does good allyship for white people look like?
Nice.
I think that sometimes and financially privileged people, something that really means a lot is when, like, I think for a lot of people of color and multiply marginalized people, it can be really difficult to constantly be like throwing down the hammer of being like of calling people out and then not being listened to. So something that has been a really important support for me is just having, like, knowing that there are some white people that can take on that role of yelling at their white peers. Yeah, that's my, like, gut reaction to that. Yeah.
Stephanie Lim asks, in conversations with local senior gardeners, how are they noticing the impacts of climate change in their gardens? Have they shared knowledge on how they are adapting their growing practices?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I haven't been able to get out to talk to too many folks in the growing season yet. I'm really excited about that as we move forward into the spring, and, like, hopefully when COVID ends and we can kind of be in the gardens together. It's a long-term project that I want to work on, of, like, trying to document those changes, because I think that documentation is kind of the first step. Yeah. So I don't quite know yet. I think another really big challenge for me on that point is, like, I would love to have asked my Ying Ying about what she was seeing in her garden before I stepped into this role. But, like, I don't speak the language. So that has definitely been a really big barrier for me. But hopefully, as we move forward into the growing season and, like, into my years in this position, that's something that I want to document.
I guess specifically to that, Gillian, because that's something that I'm interested in as well, and I guess in other respects, like, how would you go about documenting these changes, and especially when there is, like, a language barrier or if there isn't, like, kind of, like, and even for other folks that are interested too, like, how can there, is there ways to kind of do this in a collaborative way?
Yeah. I think it's a lot of work. I'm kind of thinking about my granddad was also a really amazing farmer. And he left us with, like, decades worth of just noting down the average temperatures, or the temperatures through the day, the temperatures through the night, what he planted, when he planted. And so that kind of, like, very long-term data is really important for climate scientists to be able to start seeing patterns. So that's something, the base of, like, of temperatures is important, but also I think combining that with if folks in the communities have kept like yearly logs of when certain things went into the ground, how certain things did throughout the year, if, like, certain really rainy years resulted in, like, worse crop production, how is that connected to, like, atmospheric conditions and, like, atmospheric river events, and then, like, also, as we start to see smoke season become a thing.
Right.
I really hate that there is smoke season now, but smoke significantly impacts the way that farms are able to produce in a really, really scary way, because, like, for me, how I've seen it over the past couple seasons. And I'm not a great gardener myself, I'm just learning. But being in conversation with other farmers is like, well, either you're going to have like a really cold, rainy summer and things won't come to fruition, or it's going to be like really hot and then the ash will fall and then your leaves will not be able to soak up the sun and produce anything. So I don't know, it's just really scary.
I think it's really fascinating though that I guess like that there is all of this body of knowledge that is accumulated, but then, you know, going back to what you were speaking to, it's like we don't really have those tools in order to actually like value that, or even want to take track of that, you know, in the first place. So I think beginning that journey is, I think, super important, especially now when we know things are changing, and yeah, what are the things that with all of these folks that have so much experience throughout their livelihood, they definitely have ideas on how to be able to adapt to what is happening, because they've had to have done that their whole life, right?
Yeah.
So I think like, yeah, I think that's super awesome that there's like kind of like a little seed there for something to happen, because I think that could definitely be something really interesting to do.
Yeah.
Is there anyone else that has some questions? And yeah, thank you to everyone that's written so far. This is really great. These are really awesome questions. And again, Gillian, thank you so much for all your work here tonight. It's been absolutely amazing to hear all of what you're saying. Yeah, super lucky to have you here with us. So pancakes and puppetry. Awesome. Is there support for parallel systems in other municipalities outside of Vancouver that are more protected?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm really not sure. I doubt it. But I don't really think I know. I focused so much on Vancouver that I've lost the rest of the entire world. Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
I feel like now that I have a maybe a framework to talk about this or think about this, I grew up in Surrey my whole life. I still live there. So potentially one of these parallel food systems is all the East Indian groceries, and all of the temples, all of their community spaces. Would that be considered a parallel food system?
Yeah, I mean, I would.
They have a strong background in farming too. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like there are a lot of very similar kind of histories around like South Asian farming beyond just like Vancouver. There's a really long history of South Asian farming in the Okanagan as well. Yeah, and I think those same like similar kind of backyard farming of like culturally relevant foods is something that I've witnessed personally. So yeah, I don't know too much about it in my background, but I know that there are definitely big similarities, and most likely, yeah, I would call it a parallel food system.
Amazing. Learn something new every day. And pancakes and puppets shared some links here. So Richmond Food Security and Richmond Parks, Garden City Lands. I'm not sure what this is about, but thank you for sharing. Anyone else have a question for Gillian? Allison says, thank you so much. It was so informative. I definitely agree. Oh, and Carmen writes, I grew up in Burnaby and we went down to the Fraser River to get our vegetables from our favorite place, Hop On Farms. What was is Hop On Farms still around? Still there?
Yeah, I think it's still around, but that was like my dad's absolute favorite place to go shopping,
Yeah.
to go to Hop On Farms. And he always got like 2 weeks worth of groceries every week. So we were always
Whoa.
drowning in amazing vegetables.
Yeah, that's part of the networks that spanned all the way along the Fraser. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but we do have a farmer from the Big Bend on the screen today, who's a dear friend of mine and also worked with me at Burnaby Village. And yeah, so there's still long histories of Asian Canadian growing along that area.
Yeah,
Wow,
when I
cool.
was I guess a young adult, they put through Marine Way. There used to just be Marine Drive, and they put through Marine Way, and I was so upset because I knew that the next thing that was going to happen is a bunch of those farms would get bought out, and now they've put gravel and asphalt on a lot of that prime farmland, and somehow they managed to take it out of the agricultural land reserve,
Yeah.
which is just so foolish, just so foolish. But yeah, you see it happening over and over again, and how the big money overtakes actual like rational long-term thinking that's for the best of the community all around. Yeah, like I on principle won't go to stores down there because I don't want to go to a big box store that's on what used to be prime farmland.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Wow. Huge shout out to Hop On Farms. That's awesome.
Yeah, I really encourage folks to get down to the Big Bend area. It's such a magical place. Yeah, and like has such a rich history.
Well, cool. Awesome. Yes. Yeah, this is so yeah, pancakes and poetry brings up something interesting. So perhaps reclaiming the city golf courses for growing. Also, all of the just empty like because there's other development proposals, right? And a lot of them are just empty lots, right? So it's like, you know, it would be interesting if I feel like it's just one of the most tragic things, right? You just have huge pieces of land that are just like hanging out and then no one does anything because it's like illegal, or you know, it's like going through that process, and it's just like, and yeah, I mean the biggest one, like Little Mountain, for example, like it's like one of the most tragic ones in my opinion. But you know, it's just like, yeah, like I mean I feel like Ian, especially now with all of the policy, for example, not just the policy but just like our need, like yeah, I think are there like, Gillian, are you familiar with maybe examples of things that have happened that kind of like, you know, and maybe actually take advantage of those spaces for the better?
Yeah, I mean, Soul Food Farms, they do a lot of container gardening on like vacant lots and parking lot kind of areas. I have never worked with them personally, but I think their model is really interesting because when it's a container, you know, if they get evicted, they just pick up their trees, they pick up their plants, and they go somewhere else. But also this sounds like a really great opportunity for some direct action.
Yeah, pancakes and puppetries. Yes. Oh, and we had a couple more comments. So Guru Dal asks or writes, "Hi, unfortunately I joined late and not sure if you talked about this, but have you talked about the Vancouver Food Network / Neighborhood Food Networks?" All right. I mean, is that something you're a part of, Gillian? Or
yeah, Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice is a part of it. It's currently going under a lot of renovation right now, so I'm really excited to see kind of where it goes, and hopefully taking it on like a more advocacy route, as like it's not confined by being a nonprofit or being a registered charity organization. So like we can be a little bit more outspoken. So that's something that I'm really pushing for within the Vancouver Neighborhood Food Networks. And it also has like a fair amount of sway with the city. Yeah, so hopefully there will be some more kind of radical action coming out of that.
Yeah, and Stephanie writes, before COVID started, there was some early discussion about growing some food for concession purposes on golf course space, but the feasibility study didn't happen because, you know, right.
Wealth,
Yeah,
wealth, whiteness,
yeah.
upholding a
Well, Stephanie writes
silly
COVID,
sport.
Mhm.
Oh,
COVID's a symptom of potentially that. But yes. And Carmen writes, oh yes, I just read their how-to book on creating urban farms in containers. Seems like containers is a thing.
Yeah, well, sorry, I'm sitting here in the dark, so there's no point in me turning my camera on.
No worries, Carmen.
But I was thinking about if there's a way, like, since Still Moon is thinking about the watershed and watershed
Mhm.
health and ecosystem health, is there some way that we could get together in our thinking and lobbying about what is community health and watershed health and ecosystem health that's also related to food justice health, so that we would be like collaborating on green spaces that are good for the environment and good for local growers, good for culturally appropriate growers, and that somehow we get out of this binary system of developers versus everyone else. And that density above all is the best thing. And maybe we need to think in much more nuanced ways and get the city thinking in much more nuanced ways. And I'm just wondering about how do we brainstorm to join energies so that we're showing them a bigger picture about how this particular watershed could be, so that it has more justice for all the beings in it. And I don't really know what the answer is, but I'm wanting to think that way of, well, what are our possibilities in this neighborhood? Because we have a very interesting neighborhood here and an interesting opportunity. Oh yeah, community-based mapping, Jay Peachy is saying that's interesting. But anyways, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think something that, you know, we're working toward is trying to walk a little bit more around Indigenous food sovereignty. So we are currently in the process of hiring for the summer contract position for someone to work on Indigenous foodlands and kind of connecting up a corridor of Indigenous foodlands under the guidance of the Working Group for Indigenous Food Sovereignty. And so, like, in that way, I really see the possibility of reimagining even like what agriculture, what growing looks like, what we consider to be food, and how we consider food to grow. That's something that's been really exciting over the last couple of months, of trying to like rejig Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice to be a little bit more anti-colonial and like amplify the good of dreaming up this food corridor. And something that I think is really interesting about that and in our like communications with the working group is like how Still Creek is like this waterway that connects us throughout East Vancouver. And what is the opportunity there? Like, we steward an Indigenous food forest on Horley Avenue, and it sits on top of Still Creek. And so like, what does it look like to integrate the like water as food as well? Yeah, anyway, big questions.
Yeah, it's a huge question. And I think, Jennifer, would you like to speak?
Yeah, the other thing too, again, I'm coming from a white local government person. So, so one of the things I've been working on is natural asset management. And we've been kind of working, like currently I'm working with the city of Abbotsford to look at their plan and hopefully go towards natural asset management. And they've been kind of slowly going towards it a little bit, but it might be a good idea to even, like, the town of Gibsons is doing a lot in that regard. And I think food systems is a really great asset, really a natural asset that it can actually be incorporated into that.
Yeah.
So just a solution.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I come from like a climate background, and I've always found it really interesting how there's like this division between climate and like ecology and then food. Like, I don't really understand why food is put to the side when it's obviously all connected. Yeah, but that's really interesting. Yeah, I'd be interested in learning more.
They've actually, Abbotsford has started to look at, I don't know how far they got. I'm just starting to do kind of a literature review on them, but they're looking at incorporating natural assets and agricultural assets into their planning, and like basically all of their systems as best as possible. So
cool.
Yeah, it would be great to include all the backyard assets in our neighborhood, because I love going for walks in our neighborhood, because the backyard gardens are like the best part of our neighborhood. And yeah, I think maybe you should have a fine for having a front yard that is just lawn and that you have to have some sort of plants growing in it. I don't know. I'm just being silly about just brainstorming other ways of seeing what like people are calling single family dwellings, and they're seeing that as underutilized space, but really in an immigrant community like this, it's a really highly utilized space. There's not a wasted inch in most backyards in this neighborhood, especially the older homes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fascinating to see. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like just how things have happened for me. It's kind of full circle. I used to when I was a baby, I lived in the Grandview boundary area, and now and I'm here as like a young adult, like seeing all this, and now hearing about all these different angles and perspective is just like it really brings together how it's really interesting how we separate all these things, like for example stewardship, and then environmental advocacy, watershed health, but then it's like but no, it's like actually, we need to have all this multiplicities of angles in order to come together and actually like value the things that need to be valued, and it's for everyone's benefit, so yeah, amazing. Does anyone else have some questions or comments?
I have another question for you. Unless, did you have a question? Pancakes and puppetry?
Oh, it looks like you're unmuted, but your microphone's not working.
Of course. That's
yeah, it looks like you're unmuted, but your microphone's not working.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Nice. The actual mic.
Yeah. Sorry. I got it hooked up to my soundboard. I can do reverb from the Tri-Cities. Yo, we're all here in the Tri-Cities, super envious of all the backyard gardening and the progressive thought out there. Like, I really resonate with the perspective that you bring, Gillian, because, like when I was in elementary school, I went to play ping pong in Strathcona, and it was just such like a world of difference of the community and just the connectedness of the people. And so I'm still in the Tri-Cities, but I go to Strathcona and downtown East Side to get like life, because I'm just like, I'm one of those streaming persons of color people in Port Moody that is posting white marshmallows and white food to express my disgust at their City of the Arts non-diversity. And you know what? And I'm using food as a symbolism. And so your talk is very like kind of validating to what I'm feeling. But I you know, and I'm Filipino too. My parents are Filipino, and so like the whole like, oh man, all the good Pinoy stores are like, you know, so. But we just got to reclaim that land somehow, and like, you know, just do it in the middle of the night and start growing things. Like this is where it's come to. But I just hope that all the groups can ally together, because I think there's a lot of pockets of people doing their work and forget the colonial thing, because they can't they don't understand what's going on. And so yeah, I'd just like to congratulate you with the work, and for Carmen and Stillman and doing all that radical creative work, you know, spawning mushrooms with gloves and strange things that we really learn in a new way, and it's creepy at the same time, but it works. So yeah, like my friends are, what the heck are you doing? I was like, I was with Carmen. And so I think the arts engagement is very powerful, and it's a space to transform things. And yeah, one of my dreams is to reclaim a number of fish farm infrastructure and put floating gardens in the middle of Port Moody and just feed people that, you know, because it's such a horrible food desert in Port Moody. Like, it's crazy. You can't buy an organic vegetable of low cost east or west of Moody Street. Like Safeway in Burquitlam is like the only place you can get like a organic apple. It's and they don't realize this, right? And we're getting all this gentrification that Vancouver's had, like with the SkyTrain coming in, and you know, and they've crafted like this whole identity around Brewers Row, which is like colonial poison. So yeah, it's just really refreshing to hear this conversation. But anyways, I've got to go. Radical pancakes and puppetry is like food and storytelling, what I do. So Carbon knows what I do. So I'm of service to your work, however way.
Thank you so much, Jay Peachy. Thank you so much for bringing the amazing sound, and thank you for your thoughts. Thank you so much for being here. This is what it's all about. Thank you so much.
There's no event, so the sound gear is here in my bedroom, right? So take care.
Good night, pal.
Adrian's a sound artist, so you've made him very happy.
Oh, I'll be a beatboxing beaver.
I'm jealous that I don't have a mic right now.
I'll bring it to you 6 feet away.
Yeah.
Oh, I did bee puppets with Evan. Sorry, I know I'm hogging the time, but
no, man, you're good, man.
Okay, can I show you my bee puppets? Hold on.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Can't hear myself. So this is like the intersectionality of decolonization and basically buzzing the patriarchy. So I have I've got 2 bees. They're drone bros, the drone bro talk show, because all they do is wait for queens and they can't feed themselves and don't know how to harvest. So this is a Fuzz, it's a wild Bumby. It's my profile. He lost a wing. And then there's a Fuzz. So Fuzz and Buzz have a bro talk show, and they're just waiting around for queens, and they're like, okay, that's it. So the Richmond Food Security Society, Ian Lai, convinced him. So we have the drone bro talk show. It's just like 2 bros hanging out. And so just talking about worker bees. And so the Fuzz is a wild Bumby, so it's kind of allied to the Indigenous and native bees. And then the European colonized Buzz, they kind of talk, they meet each other at a drone congregation area, basically. They met each other in a flower pot in Richmond Center. So you get it? Yeah, I know. It's so geeky. Like, yeah, pollinators and insects, and they mistake like a queen bee for a Boeing 747. It's like, you know, so with all these kind of Richmond-y things. But anyways, that's what I'm doing. And I make pancakes in animal form. So yeah, now the grains and seeds have totally got in my head too. So I'm like analyzing where grains are coming from and how they're growing. So I think, Carmen, I think this is your fault. So
Yeah, I know. I think you're farther out than I am, Jay. I think you outdo me.
we'll see you soon. Pancakes and Puppetry, once a month episode online. So
Okay.
Yeah, I'll
the
check it out.
B1 is
Yeah,
next.
everyone check it out.
Yeah.
Amazing, Jay. Thank you so
Have a
much.
good night.
Have a good night.
Take care.
Wow. Amazing. Any last thoughts? We're approaching 8:30, so yeah, just definitely want to keep ourselves on time. And we went through a lot tonight. But yeah, if anyone has any final questions or comments.
Could I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned earlier in your talk that like the way the city is engaging with well, like this group of people, minorities, is obviously not working, right? So like internet being an issue, sending postcards, like that kind of thing, not really working. Do you have any recommendations on how to engage better?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty astonishing how bad of a job the city is doing, specifically on this. Like, I think my mind is really just like across the street with these businesses right now. The Filipino and Chinese businesses. It's been really shocking, but also not shocking. I called the city planner and I was like, have you even talked to the business owners? Have you called them? Have you gone in, like grabbed a meal, sat down with them? And they're like, oh, no COVID, we can't. I'm like, so have you phoned them? Like anything, any sort of outreach? And their response was, that's a great idea. And, I think it's like really frustrating and not surprising that folks like myself, Renfrew Collingwood Food Justice, which is like tiny little program out of a nonprofit, and then even beyond that, like we're working with Sliced Mango, we're working with Tulayan. Those are both like volunteer run, like on the ground grassroots organizing kind of folks. They don't have budgets to like pay for staff to be out front doing engagement sessions. Today we had the last of 4 engagement sessions, and I have I wish I still had all the comments, like the sticky notes, just up in my my wall behind my computer at work, but I put them all in several different envelopes to send to the city planner who's doing this rezoning, and being like, listen, I don't know how you've managed to fail at your job so significantly that like folks who have significantly less resources than you, to no resources beyond the people power, have been doing a better job than you at getting community feedback about this project. That being said, the city doesn't have any interest in actually hearing our communities. The city wants that big tower to go in. The city wants that tower to go in because it raises property values, it raises property taxes, it means more revenue for the city. So I think it's really strategic that they're doing a bad job at engaging our community and letting people know that this is happening. And yeah, I think it serves them well. So I don't know if there's an answer to like how the city can do, or a municipality can do this better, because there's no incentive for the city to support communities like the ones who are serviced by those 6 food assets across the street from me.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying on that. I guess the only thing that I could, and I'm not working for the city of Vancouver, it's just what I've seen working in government is that like, and I have friends in government, like this is just my world that I'm in.
Yeah.
Is that like often planners are like, there's not enough resources even. I know that sounds ridiculous coming from like a government standpoint, but like there's not enough planners even. And a lot of them are overworked as is, and they don't actually have time sometimes. And it's really bad. It's not good. It's the whole system in general needs to get more of them at least. So I could see why that engagement would be like, not just that engagement, but engagement in general is falling through. Like it's not an easy environment to be working in. That's why I'm asking like how, obviously like postcards aren't working, obviously internet surveys aren't working. So this is why, like, as somebody who's trying to work in that environment as well, I'm not going as a planner, but in that world, how do we engage with these people? I'm from the north, and I work in the largest regional district in British Columbia, and trying to engage with a community that is spread out over, or like you drive from one end to the other and it takes like 13 hours. Yeah, like I'm from, like, was living in Dawson Creek for a while, and our thing was from like Tumbler Ridge all the way up to like almost Fort Nelson. And that's at least a 13 to 15 hour drive. So how do you engage with your communities is a really important topic, and local government sucks at it. So that's help. Basically, like, besides getting out on the ground and going out ourselves, because the problem is that often there's no budget for that. Counselors won't allow staff just to go out and leave. It's a really messed up system in that regard. So
yeah, I mean, I appreciate that that perspective. I don't see that perspective. I think that there needs to like be more community in the way that we approach these things, you know? And like, I don't know if there is really an answer. Then if everyone is so strapped, then like we need a different system entirely.
yeah, I have friends in like the Maple Ridge planning, and he's been having like breakdowns on a weekly basis because of the amount of work that he has to do as a planner, and the counselors are on him. Like,